So as I said, my name is Karen Nichols, and I'm the Executive Director of CMHA Nova Scotia Division. And on behalf of the staff and board of the CMHA Nova Scotia Division, I welcome you here this evening. I really appreciate the fact that everyone's turning up on a beautiful night like tonight, but for a whole bunch of reasons. Mostly because I know that these sessions are really wonderful in learning about mental health. And the reason that it's wonderful is because it serves to sort of destigmatize the way we look at mental health in society. And it's through that destigmatization that we can truly create communities where everyone is treated equally and equitably, and communities where everyone feels, safe to get the same help in the same way that they would for a physical ailment. CMHA-NS has been around since 1918. We've been around for a long time, and we're part of the oldest and most extensive community mental health organizations in the province. We're part of a federation, which means that we have this sort of national presence, but we're also pan-provincial, and then we're also based in communities throughout Nova Scotia. So we have branches in Truro, Colchester, in Halifax, Dartmouth, and also in Southwest Nova. Our goal is really to support the mental health needs of all Nova Scotians throughout the province. And we do this primarily through education, advocacy, and navigation of the system, which we might hear a little bit about. So let's get on with our evening. So I'm really, really excited to welcome you to this event. Our focus will be on what has provided hope and healing for Gabby. But however, the thing we have to remember is these journeys are not always easy, and sometimes the conversation is a little sensitive. So if during the evening you feel that you need support, our friend Patricia Murray is here to offer support. Patricia, give a little wave there. And so Patricia spent her career as a psychologist and as a leader in mental health service delivery, and has also worked with us at CMHA. So if you're feeling that you need to sort of take a break from the conversation, just send a private message to Erin, who is Erin. Yep, sometimes she goes by a different name. So she's Erin. Just send her a quick message and she'll put you out into a private breakout room. And you can do that by clicking on the chat on the bottom. The other thing you can do, you can also call Crisis Service Canada at 1-833-456-4566, or the Nova Scotia Mental Health and Addiction Crisis Line at 1-888-429-8167. And maybe, Erin, if you could maybe put those in the chat, that would be great. So tonight's session is the final installment of our 2022 Mental Health Week speaker series called Empathy in Action. And it's been a big week. We've had 7 other sessions throughout the week where we've heard first voice experiences of different journeys with mental health and mental illness, and I've learned lots. We have seen 7 mental health advocates from across the province, and they share their stories and their insights with us. Now, for our 8th, and that would be Gabby. So Gabby's been in my world since the fall, when a mutual friend suggested that we connect. And for, I don't know, maybe about 30 minutes or so. And I remember leaving that conversation in complete awe, mostly because of the way Abby was able to carry herself and to authentically and wholeheartedly speak about her experience with depression. She articulated that experience in a way that shared so much wisdom and self-awareness that I was kind of blown away. Like, she's what I would call an old soul. Gabby is the author of a book called Why I Stay. So she's written a book at this stage in her life, and she wrote after her depression. Why I Stay is her first book, and it's intended as a survival guide from a teenage girl who felt the heaviness of depression and lived to see the other side. She published her book a little bit earlier this year, which I think is really awesome. And her hope is to use the experience to help others cope. Gabby is just 19 years old. Right now, she's still on this mission. She's dedicated to advocating for youth mental health and ensuring her message reaches everyone and who needs to hear it. Gabby comes from a family of 5. She's the youngest and has been publicly speaking since she was 14 years of age. She's super active in her faith and enjoys coaching volleyball in her spare time. So what I'm going to do now, I'll turn it over to Gabby to tell you a little bit about herself and share her story. We'll follow up with some questions, and if there's a little bit of time at the end, we can probably open it up to the chat to see if there's any additional questions from the folks that are in the room. So you good to go, Gabby?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Over to you.
I just want to start off by saying thank you to Karen for having me, because I think that the opportunity to speak about these hard topics is so important. Like, have those sometimes uncomfortable conversations is how we break the stigma around them and normalize the fact that it's okay to struggle, and mental illness is just as valid as any physical ones. So let's get into a little bit about my story and how I ended up here and writing this book. So I've absolutely loved school my whole life. I would always wake up in the morning super excited for the day. Like, I was one of those weird kids that would spend their extra chore money on like stationery supplies. I loved doing the work, seeing my friends, and everything else that came with it. But all of that changed my senior year. So anyone that knows me would tell you that I'm a very happy person. I've actually been described as the annoyingly positive girl many times, and was even told that they hope that reality hits me like a truck one day, but safe to say that they got their wish, and that's why I'm here talking to all of you today. So in grade 12, I got an IUD, which is a form of birth control that ended up causing a hormonal imbalance, which led to severe depression and eventually suicidal thoughts. When I was diagnosed, everyone, including myself, was completely caught off guard. This girl that loved waking up in the morning, seeing people, and coming to school every day, no longer cared about her grades or her future because she so badly hoped that she wouldn't be here to have one. Like, I would stay in my bed from the time that I woke up to the time that I went back to sleep, and I shut out everyone that was close enough to me to realize that something was wrong. And so, since I kept to myself and refused to get help, which, by the way, I do not recommend if you're struggling, I needed to find another outlet to help me survive the depression. I've always loved writing. I feel like there's something so validating about being able to see my thoughts on a page in front of me. And so that's exactly what I turned to. I bought a journal, and every time I felt like letting my mental illness win, or I could not shake the thoughts of not wanting to be here anymore, I wrote down a reason why I couldn't do that and why I needed to stay alive. So it would be like things that I knew I loved about life, or that made me smile, or anything like quotes or inspiration that made me feel like I could keep going. Even names of people that would be affected if I was gone, like, I would write all of that all over this journal. And by the time that I had realized the depression had come from the birth control, I immediately went off of it and slowly began to regain my love for waking up in the morning as I recovered. But by that point, I had hundreds and hundreds of reasons why I stayed alive. And I thought, if these gave me some comfort and hope when I was really struggling, then maybe they could do the same for someone else. So I got out my laptop and I searched up like book about reasons to stay alive, because I kind of thought it was such an obvious idea that there was no way that no one else had done it. But nothing came up. There were no results. So I decided I was going to write that book, and I have it here with me. It's Why I Stay: 365 Reasons to Stay Alive When Your Mind is Giving You Every Reason Not to. And the funny part is, I didn't actually have to write much because I already had all of the reasons, because I'd been writing them for the last year, unaware that anyone other than me would ever read them. So I just had to slap like an intro and an outro on them, and it was in my hands as a published book within 6 months of having the idea, which was pretty cool. So for the actual book, there's one reason on each page, and then the rest of the page is blank, and I actually did that on purpose. So if my reason doesn't specifically resonate with you, I left that empty space for you to write your reason to stay, because obviously my reasons were written from the brain of an 18-year-old girl, but I didn't want to limit the target audience to just that. So this way, With the opportunity to write your own reason, the audience is now geared toward anyone with mental health. And not everyone suffers with mental illness, but we all as humans have mental health that we have to look after. So the moral of the story is you don't have to be depressed to read this book. Its purpose is to be a little bit of hope in these dark times that I know we've all experienced over the last 2 years with the uncertainty of this pandemic and everything that came with it. So the feedback that I've received is beyond like anything I could have imagined. Before it was out, I had said that if one singular person reads a page and thinks to themselves, like, maybe I can make it to tomorrow, then that would mean that my pain wouldn't have been for nothing. But I was getting messages from all over the world saying they were really struggling, but my book filled them with hope, and my story reminded them that things do get better. I had kids, teens, like even adults saying that they got out of bed today, they're going to go get help, that they're going to stay because if I could do it, then so could they. So if you're struggling with thoughts of not wanting to be here and you don't really see the point of living anymore, please take it from someone that was right where you are. I now go to bed at night excited to wake up to eat my cereal the next morning. I cherish the people in my life like never before, and I truly am living instead of surviving. And I promise that you will get here too. So let's talk a little bit about depression. So before I experienced it myself, I thought that depression was just like an emotion. It was sadness, a dark cloud over your head that made you kind of gloomy. But what I learned through experiencing it is that it shows up in so many other ways. Like I remember I was irritable, frustrated, confused, and angry. I was gaining weight and then losing my appetite and not eating at all. I was being so rude to the people trying to help me, but then I would cry because I didn't mean any of the words coming out of my mouth. I just didn't know how to properly express my pain at the time. I was unable to sleep, and then I'd be sleeping for days, but I was so tired no matter how much I did. And I would call myself lazy for not being able to do anything. But looking back, like I feel for myself because it was never my fault. Like I didn't deserve to be called names for what I could or couldn't do while I was suffering. And I wasn't lazy. I was using any energy that I had to survive, and I had none left over. Like realistically, how can you not be exhausted when you're battling another person in your own mind? So please, if you are struggling, be gentle with yourself. It is not your fault. You are not lazy. You are actually quite the opposite. You are in survival mode 24/7 against a force trying to tell you that the world would be better off without you in it. And I think personally the bravest thing anyone can do is survive against a brain that is fighting them. So that was a big takeaway through experiencing depression myself. A little story here. After my book came out, my childhood best friend messaged me, and I hadn't talked to her since elementary school. And she sent me this huge heartfelt text about how often she thinks about me, wonders how I'm doing, wonders if I'm going to grow up to be what I wanted to, and if I ever got to a Justin Bieber concert like I dreamed of. She said she couldn't get through the book without crying every time she turned a page, and how she's so happy that I stayed. So there I was, thinking that no one would care if I was gone tomorrow. And there she was, a girl I hadn't talked to in 7 years, wondering if I'd ever gotten to see my favorite artist in concert, because she knew that that's something that I cared about. And I feel like I share that because this puts so much into perspective for me, because you really do have no idea who would be affected by you not being here. Like your mental illness blurs your ability to see all of the people standing in your corner, and you really would be so surprised at who's watching your journey and is inspired by it. The same thing happened with one of my teachers from grade 5. I always think about her, like I wonder how she's doing, because she was one of my favorite teachers. Like she touched my heart. And teachers have thousands and thousands of students over the years, and I thought there was absolutely no way that she would remember me, of all people. But a couple weeks ago, I get a message from her where she congratulated me on my book, and she said she found me through a Twitter post of it, and is so happy that I chose to stay. Now, I hadn't heard from her since elementary, and 7 years later, she tells me she thinks about me and wonders how I'm doing. So I can't reiterate enough that you have so many people rooting for you, even if you think you don't. Depression isolates you on purpose. I think we forget that, like, just as a physical illness does, a mental illness has real symptoms like that too. Um, Anytime I missed school for my mental health, which was a lot by the end of it, I would tell my teachers that I wasn't feeling well or my throat hurt because the COVID card worked every time, or I'd slept in and I couldn't make it to class because I did not think that it was acceptable to have to stay home because my brain was sick. Maybe it was because I felt embarrassed for being seen as like weak, or because I didn't think that they would even accept it as a valid excuse. Now, I will say that I have the most amazing parents in the world, but their way of coping with things was always suck it up and push through. They're much better now because seeing my journey has forced them to be, but I have never blamed them for the way they reacted when I was struggling, because it isn't their fault that they were raised that way. That's the same thing with teachers, mentors, adults. Unfortunately, that generation has been taught, either consciously or unconsciously, that their stories and experiences don't matter. That if you simply buck up, then your problems will magically resolve themselves, or even better, then your problems will, you just gotta let it go. So if an adult has reacted in that way when you have told them that you were sad or struggling, maybe it was because they didn't know any better. But that's not an excuse. That is just recognizing the fact that sometimes people react certain ways because that's all that they know. But the only way to break the stigma and shift the paradigm surrounding mental health is to have these open and sometimes uncomfortable conversations about it. We all have to do better to create a space where we feel comfortable talking about our struggles to others, whether that be an adult or friend or a professional. I will say that my biggest regret through experiencing depression was definitely the fact that I refused to get help. I don't get mad at myself about it though, because that was a symptom of my mental illness. Like, it isolated me. It told me that I would sound stupid and weak if I spoke up. It made me think that no one cared about me and I was a burden to everyone. So I kept it to myself until I was forced to say something when my teachers noticed that something wasn't right. So they actually sent me to guidance, and I walked in there and I just melted onto her floor, like bawling my eyes out, and told her everything that had been going on. And the relief of the weight that was lifted off of my shoulders in that moment was indescribable. Like, I will never forget that. And I think the reason that I really wrote this book and am so passionate about advocating for mental health is because I made a promise to myself after I recovered that I would never let it get as bad as it did ever again. And I won't let all of that pain have been for nothing. And I think too often we hear about deaths by suicide and we immediately think, what could I have done to prevent that? And I don't want any of those deaths to have been for nothing. And I don't want to ask myself that question anymore, and instead do everything I possibly can to make anyone feeling that way know that there is light on the other side of mental illness. Like, recovery is so possible, and I think my story is a beautiful example of that. And I'm so thankful for opportunities like this to be able to share it. I'm done, Karn.
We're a professional organization here. I just said to Gabby, give me a cue when you're done. I'm done. Thank you for that. You are amazing. And I know that when I get to a place where, they talk about the spectrum of mental health, and, as you're going towards crisis, and I know with myself as I move up and down, at one end of it, that my brain doesn't function clearly. Like, I'm not able to articulate exactly what I'm feeling very well. And I'm so curious about how you're able to do that. Like, I'm so impressed with your ability to be so clear and concise about the impact of this illness on how you responded, and it's just so it's so clear. How does that happen? What's your
Well,
secret?
I think I got to know it a little too well, where I just was determined to then understand kind of what I was going through. And I think that, like, my view on mental illness before experiencing it versus after, like, completely changed. Like, um, I'll share a story. My best friend struggled with depression really young. And as I mentioned, I was the annoyingly positive girl. So, of course, I was in her face, like, just push through, think happy thoughts. Like, I had no idea that it was just as serious as a physical illness. I thought it was just an emotion versus an illness. And so I remember after experiencing the depression, I texted her and I was like, I'm so sorry that I reacted the way I did when you were struggling, because I genuinely just didn't understand it. Like, I had no idea. And I really don't think you can fully understand it unless you experience it. I've never really found the words to properly convey what I was actually feeling when I struggled.
Mm.
So I think being in this spot to help people now that I've experienced it has really made me want to learn how to talk about it the way that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, the writing part probably helps you sort out a few things as well along the way, I would imagine. Hey.
Definitely.
Yeah. I'm curious about, so the writing was a big part of your recovery.
Yeah.
What else played a role in that?
Yeah. So I wish I had more resources. Like, I wish I told someone so that I could have had other outlets, but I I didn't. And so I'm educating myself on what you can do when you're struggling, all the resources that you guys have for people struggling. But
Hmm.
when I was at my worst, I had no idea what to do. I thought, oh, like, what could talking to someone do? Like, that's not going to cure me. I remember saying those exact words to my mom. Um, so I probably turned to writing and Dairy Queen. That was probably all that I had to help.
That was it. Seriously.
Oh yeah,
Huh,
I didn't know what hit me. I didn't know how to deal with it. I'd never
right.
experienced it before, so I wish I had more things, but I didn't.
Hmm. So if you were giving advice to someone who was kind of in your shoes,
Yeah.
what would that advice be, do you think?
Well, I remember people were telling, like, my mom was like, we should get you help, like, tell someone. And I was like, I'm not telling anyone. I don't want my friends knowing I'm struggling. I felt embarrassed. But I would say, just, it's not embarrassing. Like, we're removing the stigma. It is so normal to struggle. It is not your fault. And advice for someone that's helping someone that may be struggling, I think just be there. Because, like, I actually have a reason in my book that described really well what I felt before I got support. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's 236 here. Yeah. So if you don't want to talk to someone about how you feel yet, then just find someone to sit with. Enjoy their presence, their breath, their comforting manner. Paying close attention to the beauty of someone else's existence can help you realize the beauty of yours. And so, like, I didn't want to talk to anyone, but you don't want to feel alone. Like, it's not that I didn't want anyone, I just didn't know what to say. And so just knowing that someone's simply there for you
Mm-hmm.
goes against everything that your mental illness is telling you. Like, you're worthless, no one cares about you, you're a burden. It, like, throws all of that out the door because you see someone that's present. And let the person struggling talk to you. Don't string it out of them. Like, they will come to you when they're ready. So just be there is my biggest advice.
That's hard. Like it's interesting because, as I said, we've listened to 7 other sessions, and that has come up a couple of times in terms of how to be there for people,
Mhm.
and it's always just be there.
Just be
It's
there.
it's there's it's not about the words you say. It's not about what you're wearing or where you are or anything. It's just being there. There's something
Absolutely.
about that. It's connection, I suppose. Hey.
Yeah, definitely. Like, And even if you're not saying words, like I remember I would just like to sit with my mom. We were watching a show and none of us were talking about it. I would just like to sit there to know that there was someone there if I needed to talk.
Wow, that's so important. So you
Yeah.
talked a little bit about stigma. What have you learned about stigma? Because I remember hearing you talk earlier in another podcast, I guess, and uh, just about our perceptions of mental health and mental illness, and I'm just curious. You've seen both sides now, and so what have you learned, and what's you've talked a little bit also about how do we mitigate or take the sting out of stigma, but tell me a little bit about what your thoughts are around stigma.
Yeah, so I think seeing both sides of it is really interesting because even though I went through the depression and the suicidal thoughts, now that I'm fully recovered and healed, it's even hard to like describe what that was like
Mm,
and remember exactly what it felt like because it's just, first of all, you kind of try to block it out because you never want to feel like that. But as someone who went through it and still struggles to kind of find the words to describe it, I think that stigma is really stems from people that haven't experienced it and oh, it's just an emotion, it's just like a
yeah,
feeling, you're weak, you're being
yeah,
stupid,
yeah. Suck
all
it
of
up.
those.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
And I think it also stems from, like I said, how everyone was raised because your parents will tell you, suck it up, push through, be strong. And it wasn't always like, it's okay, let's sit down and talk about it.
mm,
And I do some speaking at schools, and in my talk, I make sure when I'm talking about stigma and shifting the paradigm and stuff like that, I bring up about how falling asleep in class because we're so quick to think like, oh, they're lazy, they're misbehaving if you fall asleep in class. But what if you were up the night before, like fighting with your mind, you couldn't sleep, your parents were fighting, you couldn't get any, like, it's just, we all just have to learn to be human again and have empathy and think about these things before immediately being like, no, this is how it's always been, this is how it has to be. But these conversations are
mm.
what sparked that.
Do you think and this is a question that gets often asked, but do you think COVID has enhanced our ability to be more empathetic or not?
I think that being locked in our house for the last 2 years has had an insane effect on everyone's mental health. Like,
Mm,
whether you succumb to mental illness or not, like, I think everyone's just been so stressed, overwhelmed, all of these new feelings with the pandemic that I think you can't help but think that they have to learn to have empathy. But I'm not going to speak for the whole world, so
no, no,
not
no, of
sure.
course. Yeah.
But I do think that something that we all went through collectively, as like every single person went through it, so we all have to have empathy with some sorts, relating to that, I'd hope.
Yeah. Do you feel that um, sort of along those lines? Do you feel that people are more open talking about their mental health as well, or especially in your peer groups, for example, or is it still tough?
I feel like before, I know I was only like 16, 17 when the pandemic started, and I feel like anything my friends were talking about, it was more like just silly kid stuff. But I think definitely now, when we were completely shut down and there was nothing to do but FaceTime, Zoom, all these different things, I think it definitely opened so many conversations because not everyone's home situation is ideal or great. And we were all stuck in our houses with the outlet that we use. Like, school is an outlet for a lot of people to get out of their house and see friends and extroverts, like people like that
Mm,
lost that completely. So we were all talking to each other, FaceTiming, and it definitely opened up the conversation of mental health because we were kind of just like, how's everyone doing with this?
Mm,
Like, is anyone else just sad right now?
mm,
And it that's where it kind of sparked everything.
mhm,
So it definitely did that.
mm, mm. I'm going to go flip back to some more kind of questions around your specific experience. Was so you mentioned that your depression was sort of a side effect of the IUD, which was kind of news to me that could actually be a thing. But there's lots of people that get IUDs or get birth control with, which does mess with your hormones.
Yeah.
How did you make that connection between the IUD and the depression? Like, it would have been kind of a crapshoot in a way, right?
Yeah. So like I'll start off by saying that I think it has to be talked about, like that topic, more just in general, because I had never been on birth control before, but I was experiencing really bad period cramps, and I went to my doctor, and he prescribed this to help.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the reason I say this topic needs to be talked about more is because if I knew that the hormones in it were going to cause me to like lose my will to live, I probably would have dealt with the cramps. So um, but I will say that everyone reacts to medications differently, and I'm not a professional, so talk to your doctor, whatever's
Mm-hmm.
best for you. This is just, I want to share my personal experience because I feel like I've actually had a lot of girls come forward and say, oh my goodness, I didn't even realize this, but like I've been depressed ever since I went on birth control,
Wow.
and it's like completely linked to that. But that's not even something that you think of. Like, it's prescribed for so many reasons. Like, my friend was on it for her acne, and you never think something you're going on for acne can cause you to want to take your own life. So it is a crazy connection. That's why I really want to create awareness around it, because I think it was my mom that was like, what? Because we were like trying to think back once I told her I was like depressed, and we were trying to think back, like, when did this all start? And then we like were thinking about it, we narrowed it down, and then we both were like, oh my goodness, this is what this is. And I feel like a lot of people don't have that ability to track back and think about it, or have like an exact day that it started. So just putting the conversation out there, like this can happen, is
Mm-hmm.
really eye-opening to a lot of people. So yeah, that's where my whole journey started. Like, I wouldn't have written the book if I had never gone on the birth control, which is crazy to think.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really want to create awareness around, just read the side effects, talk to your doctor, just be aware that this can happen.
Um, in the interview you gave earlier on, I remember you saying something that really struck me about your view of depression and mental health shifting after you experienced it for yourself. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that was like, and how that actually shifted?
Yes, absolutely. So Um, I had experienced anxiety before, but not depression. So when I was little, I had very bad anxiety. So I had experienced mental illness, and I understood that that wasn't a choice, because it was separation anxiety. So I genuinely thought my mom was going to die every time she left my sight. Like, she couldn't go to the mailbox, I couldn't go to school, stuff like that. And I understood at the age of 5 that that wasn't my choice. Like, my brain was, I didn't know the right like words for it, but I knew my brain was sick. It wasn't me in there saying that. So I feel like I understood anxiety from a very young age, but for some reason my brain didn't click to think, oh, depression, all of these other mental illnesses, it's the same thing. So before experiencing depression, I did think it was just a sadness that you could kind of snap out of, and the right words can be said to you, or if you're just more grateful, then it'll go away. But what I really want to reiterate to people is, it is literally an illness. Like, just as if someone's breaking their leg, someone has depression, and you have to receive treatment, you have to take care of yourself, you have to be nice to yourself, all of these things. So I definitely see the way to deal with it very differently, and just the concept of it as a whole, as you are sick and it's not just an emotion or something that you
Mm,
can out of.
yeah. Yeah, I think that that's so true. And it's a good lesson to learn early on because it helps you as you go on your own journey. And as
Yeah,
you said, we all have mental health. Like that's the
yeah,
thing I think we do have to remember is that each one of us, comes into that continuum at a different place and we will move
mhm,
up and down it. And we have to sort of build that resiliency to work with it, to
yeah.
work with how we're feeling at the time, right?
Oh yeah, and I was looking at statistics for one of my talks, and it was something like um, 1 in 2 Canadians experience mental illness by the age of 40 or something. Don't quote me on that,
Hmm.
but that's like 50% of the population by the time you're middle aged.
Hmm.
And it's so all around us, like whether it directly affects you, you know someone with mental illness, mental health issues. And I feel like it's so relevant and we still tiptoe around it like it's some like awkward, uncomfortable conversation when really it's everywhere and it just needs to be normalized to talk about. Like it's nothing to be ashamed of.
So what's the advice you would give to, um, I don't know, the school system, for example? Because I think that's partly where it starts in terms of understanding social emotional learning and how we, are become self-aware of how we're responding to the environment. Is there something that can be done through the schools that might be really helpful in this situation, do you think?
Yeah, last year when I was kind of coming out of my struggles and started to advocate for mental health, I actually did a talk for the teachers at my school because after experiencing it, I was like, there are a lot of problems here that we need to fix. So I talked to them about like how I didn't feel comfortable coming to them and saying, I'm having a bad mental health day. I can't bring myself to care about long division right now.
Hmm.
And that's why I was pretending to be sick all the time. And I think a big shift would be having sick days not only be like, because you have your exams and there's days you can miss, you can't miss. And I don't think that physical illnesses should be the only thing
Right.
that is a valid excuse. So that's a big shift that I talked about. And I did talk about the falling